Making it to the NFL is hard. Becoming a legend, that's nearly impossible. But staying one until the very end, that is the rarest feat of all. Some walk away on top, some fade under the lights, and some go out with a bang you never saw coming. This is how some of the greatest players of the 21st century played their final down and how the game said goodbye. Now, before he was a podcast host and a TV personality, Jason Kelce spent a decade as an anchor with the Philadelphia Eagles. He hung up his pads following the 2023 season, but he would retire as a Super Bowl champion and the Eagles' all-time leader in consecutive games started, hardly missing a snap throughout his career. Truthfully, it was his versatility and consistency that made him one of the best centers to ever play the game. He made 7 Pro Bowls and 6 first-team All-Pros, including 3 through the final 3 years of his career. Kelce showed consistent dominance throughout his long career and became the centerpiece of an Eagles offensive line that birthed the brotherly shove, now known as the tush push, a play that's so unstoppable that some fans and teams have called for it to be banned. As a wildcard team in 2023, Jason Kelce's final appearance would be a road playoff game against Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And even coming into that game too, they were the reigning NFC champs and were very heavily favored going into Tampa Bay. But that was also at the end of that, just as we all remember, messy 2023 season, and the wheels were starting to fall off, and well, they fell off in that game. Tampa Bay came out swinging against the weak defense of Philly, and the offense struggled to get it going. With the second half winding down, they were down by 13 points before a strong touchdown drive brought it within 7. Instead of going for the extra point, however, the Eagles tried to establish their physical dominance with a tush push for 2, and Kelce led the charge for Hurts, but for one of the only times in 2023, the tush push was halted, killing the Eagles' momentum going into halftime. Philly never recovered, scoring 0 points in the second half, while Kelce never gave up a sack or a quarterback hit. He did allow some pressure from Vita Vea in the Bucs' defensive interior. Nonetheless, though, he would announce his retirement a few weeks later after that loss in the playoffs. He was a Super Bowl champion and one of the greatest offensive linemen in the history of football. And while his final game was far from extraordinary, it was just one page in the story of the game's most interesting figures. And now, staying in the realm of football stars turned TV stars, Peyton Manning ended his career as such an important figure in football that the pitch to get him into the Hall of Fame was simply his name. The Sheriff spent the majority of his football life in Indianapolis with the Colts, where he won 4 MVPs in a Super Bowl. They did end up moving on from him following a serious neck injury, instead opting to develop Andrew Luck, and Manning signed with the Denver Broncos, where he won another MVP and went to the Super Bowl, but would lose to the Seahawks. And that's where in his final 2 seasons in Denver, Manning's body began to betray him, causing less throwing power and much more turnovers. Nonetheless, though, the Broncos earned the AFC's 1 seed in 2015 on the back of a dominant defense, setting the stage for Peyton to return for the playoffs one last time. And that's the thing too, despite all the playoff struggles throughout his career, he was solid throughout this run. He distributed while relying on his defense and run game all the way to an AFC Championship victory. Manning's final game would be Super Bowl 50, in which he threw for just 141 yards, taking a beating for 5 sacks and an interception, but throwing a 2-point conversion as the final pass of his career. He retired following the 24-10 Super Bowl victory, and while some of his records have since been surpassed, Manning finished his career as the player with the most career MVP awards, first-team All-Pro selections, 4,000-yard seasons, and passing yards. He also had the season highs for touchdown passes and yards, and was one of just 4 quarterbacks to defeat all 32 NFL teams. Now, speaking of both crazy counting stats and quarterbacks turned TV analysts, Drew Brees is up next. After a rocky start to his career created by the dysfunctional Chargers and an injury, he walked after a year under the franchise tag, signing a contract with the New Orleans Saints, where he would play out the remainder of his career. After a few seasons to acclimate, Brees led New Orleans to a championship in Super Bowl 44 and never won fewer than 7 games as their starter in his 15 years with the franchise. As his career did wind down, Brees began to be battered with injuries, tearing his thumb in 2019 and breaking multiple ribs in 2020, an injury which collapsed one of his lungs. And the crazy part too is, despite missing 4 games that season, he still managed to lead that explosive offense into the playoffs that year. and has some dominant performances along the way. They stomped the Bears in the wildcard round before coming up against Tom Brady's Bucs in the divisional round. In the final game of his career, Brees was surgical early, taking small gains after a dangerous Tampa Bay defense, and he had a passing touchdown in the third quarter to take the lead, but once the Bucs tied it again, Brees began forcing the ball into unsafe situations, throwing interceptions on his final 2 possessions, including with the final passing attempt of his career. Surprisingly too, after reworking his deal for one last push with the Saints, Brees announced his retirement from football 15 years after signing with them, finishing his career with every accolade a quarterback could dream of other than an MVP award. He was the Saints' career leader in every passing category imaginable and dominated the box score down to the very end. Now, another legend to escape the Chargers was Peyton Manning's little brother, Eli Manning, who played his entirety of his career with the New York Giants after forcing a draft night trade. A generally unremarkable regular season quarterback, Eli Manning made just 4 Pro Bowls in his career, despite never missing a game from 2005 to 2017. And I mean, despite leading the league in interceptions 3 different times and that kind of being his kryptonite, the dude was able to reach a different level every time he got into the postseason. As we all know, he's the only quarterback to ever beat Tom Brady twice in the Super Bowl, winning a pair of Super Bowl MVPs in Super Bowl 42 and 46. But that's the thing, after those 2 magical runs he had, the playoff magic kind of sputtered. The Giants only made the playoffs once after their 2011 championship season, posting 5 losing records with Manning as the starter. As he started to taper off, New York drafted his replacement in 2019 in the form of Daniel Jones, who took the starting job in week 3 of his rookie season. Later that year, Jones was injured, giving Manning back the starting role, but it was pretty brief, and his final game was a 36-20 win over the Dolphins. In the game, Eli Manning threw for 283 yards and a pair of touchdowns, but also tossed 3 interceptions. With Daniel Jones returning to finish the season the following week, Manning was lauded as one of the greatest Giants in history when he hung up the cleats after 16 seasons. But now this next player, well, he's probably the biggest what if in NFL history. Andrew Luck, the prodigal son of Indianapolis, he was drafted first overall in 2012 and was excellent right out of the gate. He led the Colts to 3 straight 11-win seasons, averaging more than 4,000 yards per season and making 3 straight Pro Bowls. The future seemed bright even as injuries limited his 2015 and 2017 seasons. After missing all of 2017, Luck came back with vengeance in 2018, nearly matching his career highs in every important stat as he took the Colts back to the playoffs with a 10-6 record. He had an awesome game against the Texans in the wildcard round and met with the Chiefs in the divisional. In this game, Andrew Luck was solid with 200 passing yards and a touchdown, but against a rising star in Patrick Mahomes, the Colts couldn't keep up, dropping the game 31-13. And now, as crazy as it sounds too, this really shouldn't have been that shocking of a loss, but what made it so shocking is that was the last game that Andrew Luck would ever play. The man who had given Colts fans hopes of a dynasty never made a Super Bowl, and then he announced his retirement just 2 weeks before the 2019 season was set to begin. At the peak of his physical powers, despite having little to show for it, the idea of further injuries and rehab pushed him away from the game, and he walked away from football as one of the biggest what-ifs. Switching to another guy who ended his career sooner than people expected was Luke Kuechly. The legendary linebacker spent all 8 of his seasons with the Carolina Panthers, and without a doubt, he was a staple of not only their defense, but their entire organization in Carolina. Throughout his career, Kuechly was the Defensive Rookie of the Year in 2012, then never missed a Pro Bowl for the rest of his career. He also added 5 first-team All-Pros, 2 other All-Pro teams, and a Defensive Player of the Year award. The most lethal linebacker of the 2010s, Kuechly was a demon, leading the Panthers through their rebuild around Cam Newton into a decade of defensive relevance. And yes, while he had missed occasional games throughout his career, he was consistently playing through injuries and making himself available. He was as stable as ever in 2019, his farewell season, posting 81 solo tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and a pair of interceptions, although he didn't find a sack. In a season hampered by a declining and injured Cam Newton, the Panthers were just 5-10 going into Week 17 with their interim head coach. Up against the division rival Saints, Kuechly had his work cut out for him as New Orleans went up 35-3 against Carolina in the first half, And it did become a 40-10 blowout, but he did post solid grades on PFF for his individual play. He had a quarterback hit on his only pass rush snap, broke up a pass, and added a tackle for loss. He then retired during the 2019-2020 offseason, saying that concussions over the course of his career were beginning to affect his everyday life and that he shouldn't take extra risks. He went out as one of the greatest Panthers in history, although he likely had the physical prowess to be dominant for several more years. And well, on the topic of just physical dominance, our next player was nothing short of just that. His size, speed, and skill ruined the day of whatever poor defender lined up against him. In his 9 NFL seasons, Johnson averaged 1,400 yards per season in his career and almost 10 touchdowns. Hell, his combination with Matthew Stafford and him being on the field at the exact same time almost brought the Detroit Lions back to relevance. In his final season, Johnson looked far from washed up, totaling 1,200 yards and making a 6th straight Pro Bowl. He had the greatest final season of a receiver in history by the numbers and went out with a bang in Week 17 against the Bears. While it is unclear whether Johnson knew that he would be retiring after the 2015 season, he played like a man with nothing to lose, which stood out in the game between two teams already eliminated from the playoffs. On that first drive of the game, Johnson took a pass 25 yards before going on to put up 10 catches for 137 yards and a touchdown in a 24-20 win over the Bears. Megatron did have his differences with the Lions organization, but he never went to play somewhere else and finished his career with 6 Pro Bowls and 3 first-team All-Pros. And then finally, we have one of the greatest defensive players in NFL history, Ray Lewis. Lewis was a cornerstone for the Ravens organization from the moment they were founded, playing in Baltimore for 17 years, almost never missing time with injury, and putting quarterbacks and running backs into a specially designed blender. He defined AFC North football to the tune of 12 Pro Bowls, 7 All-Pros, 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, and the greatest final game in NFL history. You see, Lewis didn't have much left in the tank in 2012, tearing his tricep early in the season, which prompted an announcement of retirement to follow the 2012-2013 playoffs. Fortunately for Ray in Baltimore though, this playoff run would be special. A healthy Ray Lewis returned to add 13 tackles and a pass breakup to a win over the Colts, and then Ray kept ramping it up for 2 more playoff wins, including the Mile High Miracle game and a thrashing of the Patriots. But Lewis's final game would be set in the Superdome at Super Bowl 47 against the San Francisco 49ers. And that's where in this game where the Ravens drafted Ray Lewis to be this generational leader, he stepped up in the biggest moment of his career. He wasn't great because of his counting stats, but because he was the focal point of the defense, barking orders and bringing energy to halt a surging Jim Harbaugh and Colin Kaepernick offense. Despite recording just 7 total tackles in the game, for his mental contributions and work throughout the playoff run, he was named the Super Bowl MVP. Lewis kept his promise and retired during the subsequent offseason, but had dominated football for 17 years and went out with a 2nd championship ring on his finger. And now yes, although it is hard to have the Kobe Bryant 60-point game to finish an NFL career, many of these legends still found ways to contribute in spite of their injury, age, and other factors. Meanwhile, some played themselves out of the league and retired despite their desire to keep on going.